Hello and welcome to the Westcity Church podcast. If you'd like to get to know us more, find us at westcitychurch.com.au. We really hope that you're encouraged by today's message.
Feels like a relay. Just pass the baton. Hey church, how are we? Good morning. It's good to be here with you. Thanks Steve for that update. That's definitely on most of our minds as well, as we come this morning to the table together as a family. And around that thought of communion, this week I've been in Singapore and saw that news come through, which was surprising, alarming, and definitely in my heart as well. It was funny, while I was in Singapore, I was sitting at a hawker's market. Has anyone ever been to Singapore? It's a beautiful place, and while I was in this hawker's market, I was smelling the smells of all the beautiful satays and wonderful foods that they have all throughout this beautiful culture. And while I was sitting there having dinner, a song came on, which I haven't heard for many, many years. And it was an old Bee Gees song. Does anyone love the Bee Gees? Can someone give me some falsetto, Josh? Staying Alive? Yeah, that was beautiful. Barry Gibb, everyone. But no, Bee Gees, a classic band from times gone past. And while I was sitting there listening to this song, it was a song that my mum actually had on a CD single. And it was a song that instantly took me back. It was a song that just was this moment of just reflection. I just had this moment of remembrance where I was like, wow. And I was just talking to my girlfriend. For those that don't know, off the market. And no, that's not the celebration. Stop it. So we were sitting there, and I just said, I haven't heard this song for years. And I was like, it just made me really remember my mum and how great she would have loved the food that we were eating. And we had this moment of just. Yeah, I think she said something like, it's almost like she's here with us. And I was like, that's a really cool thought, but she's not. But and thankfully, because she would have been, telling me off for using my hands in the food and stuff like that. But it's this really cool thing, I think, when we remember. And the idea of the table is literally not even an idea. The concept of it is pointed towards when Jesus says, take this in remembrance of me. And there's this concept around remembrance where it's not just thinking about, it's not just participating in, it's this process of remembrance. And I think it's known as the Proust effect, formerly kind of detailed around a French novelist who once wrote about how he had tasted something and it instantly took him back to his childhood or instantly took him back to another time in his life. And this idea of the Proust effect, I think he was probably around the 19th century, real, old cat, dead now. But he definitely had this thing nailed around the idea of something that takes you back to remembrance. And I think even before Proust was Jesus. And Jesus had created this thing amongst his disciples and his followers, and even for us today, where participating in communion is more than just an act. It's more than just doing something. It's more than just thinking about. It's actually the process of remembering. So it has nothing to do with the Bee Gees, but everything to do with Jesus. And the idea for me is when I take communion, it really does take me to that place of remembering that the Lord is good. Psalm 34, one of my favorite Psalms, says in verse 8, to taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. That psalm has nothing to do with communion, written way before Jesus even commissioned his disciples to take communion. But that I thought I'd just speak over us this morning to taste and see as we come to the table that the Lord is good, that blessed is the man and the woman who takes refuge in him. Whether we come to the table this morning with trials, with heartache, with anything, we can come and remember that the Lord is good. So we'll do that after the service, towards the end of the service. And as we do, allow the bread as we take it and the wine to be something that becomes a Proust effect for us. That it be a time that week after week we can come to the table and remember that the Lord is good. So often I think the communion table can be a somber time, can be a time of just regression where we just go inward, and there is something to the reverence of the communion table. But more than anything, if I can ask this morning, that we remember that the Lord is good. Amen? Thanks, church.
Morning. It is good to be here. It's good to be part of this community, yeah? It's not something I take for granted, and to come and sing with you is a real blessing. Who's been enjoying this series so far, the Life of Liturgy? Can I have a show? I don't know about you, but I feel like these messages have been pretty good, right? We've had Tara spoke on giving. We had Trav speak an absolute banger on music. I think we'll all agree that was a pretty special message. Cody knocking communion out the park, and then Theo last week speaking about community. So I feel like the stakes are high. I feel like I need to bring my A game, and you get to be the decider of that. But here I am talking about baptism today. And to start, I want to just read this quote from David Benner that encapsulates the essence of this series, this Life of Liturgy, as we explore how the things that we do together are actually shaping who we are. And it's from a book which is called Soulful Spirituality, Becoming Fully Alive and Deeply Human. And I feel like I could just stop at the title, but the book was even better. And he says, spirituality that enhances life always involves our whole person, body, emotions, sexuality, consciousness, the unconscious, longings and desires, thoughts, the senses and imagination, and much more. For only a lived, holistic spirituality can be transformational, integrative, and capable of helping us become fully alive and deeply human. It is a spirituality that orients us towards a life that is lived in the here and the now, and it's in our embodied existence. The truth is that we do not need to disassociate from our bodies or distance ourselves from the realities of life in order to live spiritually. Spirituality need not be an escape from anything. It can be the completion and the integration of every aspect of life. And I don't know about you, but that sounds like kind of some life goals. To live my faith in community and before others in a way that actually impacts the entirety of my existence and just kind of is part of who I am. So that's our hope this series, that we can help connect the dots on how some of the communal practices that we commit to together can also connect us to who we are and who we're becoming. So today we talk about baptism. Now, when baptism came across my path for this topic, the first two things that I remembered straight away, Jaxon, was firstly my own baptism when I was 15. I got baptised down at Hillary's Boat Harbour. I don't know if anyone knows kind of further north of the river. There's a nice little kind of beach there that you can be baptized. Well, I was baptised in. So at 15, and that really was quite a turning point for me in my life. I hadn't grown up in church at all, and so finding Jesus when I was 14 and choosing to be baptised was quite a big moment in my life. I still remember the sense of kind of nervous anxiety and fear I had when I went to ask my dad, who I was living with at the time, if it was okay if I got baptised, because the church I was a part of felt like that was important, and that I was only 15, and we didn't really have the kind of relationship that we talked about deep things or things that mattered. So, when you're asking something that's deeply personal, that really, matters to you deeply and you're putting that out there to someone. I remember just the anxiety of coming up to him at his desk. I can still picture it now, this anxious 15-year-old just saying, Dad, would it be okay if, I got baptised? And I remember he kind of stopped what he was doing. I think this is showing my age. He was typing on a typewriter at the time, what can I say? Look, it was a fancy one that had a screen on the front, but nonetheless, it was, and he looked up at me and he said to me, and I remember it clearly, he said, Lauren, he said, I'm not into religion and I, think it's just the cause of all the wars in the world. I do think this is something that you grow out of, but if it's important to you, then, you're more than welcome. And I still chuckle at that now because some years later, not that many, here I still am. And wonderfully since that time, our family has had a wonderful life in the church. And it was that's the first thing I thought of. Now, to divulge more of who you may or may not know me to be, the second thing I thought of was actually a song by Good Charlotte called The River, which talks about being baptised in the river. And it's, poppy, punky, Good Morning Revival album. You may or may not know it, but let's just say the fact I could sing it if you wanted. I'm not going to, but all I'll say is that it's a tune that gets stuck in your head and it does not leave your ear. So the moment I had baptism come my way, I've had that song in the back of my head the whole time I've written this message. So they're two little insights into who I am. But along with all the other traditions that we've talked about, the practices that we've talked about, the church throughout time has had lots of debates over what baptism should be, what it could look like. Is it a full immersion? Is it a dunk? Is it a sprinkling? Is it for adults and children, just adults? There's all sorts of things. Really what you can learn from this is that church has a great way of spending a lot of time discussing and throwing about things that may or may not really matter. So what we here, though, at Westcity do is we do believe in what has come to be known as a believer's baptism. And it's this idea that baptism is linked with those who are able to profess a belief in Christ. And so that's no age limit per se, but is a sense of being able to recognise someone's able to say, I believe in Jesus, I understand who he is and I believe in him. And then we do a full immersion as part of our baptism practice. Now, you may or may not know that behind us, right where Bronwyn and Tara are sitting, is actually a baptistry. So it's got a board over it now. Once upon a time, the church, that was the front of church. And like most good Church of Christs back in the day when they were built, you would build a baptistry in your building as quite a sign. It was sat there central alongside the communion table and other things to just signify the importance of baptism as a practice that we do as a church. You may also not be aware that in recent days we've had about 4 of our young people get baptised down in the beach of different times. So they've done that in front of their family and friends and have really felt that it was something they wanted to do as a way of confessing their faith and their decision for Christ. So while baptism might not be something that you see every week, that we talk about every week, it is deeply embedded in who we are and who we confess to be as a community. So my hope this morning is to unpack some of what that means in a way that brings a little bit of clarity. For those who have been baptised, it might be a remembering, again, of what that decision meant for you. If you haven't been baptised, it might be something that you can just begin to listen and be curious about. But either way, my hope is that we will link this practice of baptism to the here and now of who we are and what that means. I'm going to look at baptism through the lens of beginnings, belonging, and becoming. And I have to give much credit for the framework and a lot of the essence of this message to a book written by Eric P. Peterson called Wade in the Water, Following the Sacred Stream of Baptism. I started reading it about 6 weeks ago in preparation for this, and it was just such good material that I was like, you know what, I'm just going to have to claim it at the beginning and say this is really, a lot of what you hear in this message today comes from that, and I'm not ashamed to say that. So don't mistakenly credit too much to me this morning, but I hope that I'm able to translate it and deliver it to you in a way that makes sense to who we are as a community. So let's start with beginnings. Baptism as a beginning. Baptism obviously involves water. There's a going under the water that it involves. It's not possible to have a baptism without the water. And water has played a key role throughout the entire Bible. It's one of those patterns you can pick up on, a thread you can pull if you like, and it reveals a lot throughout the whole entire Bible. It's mentioned in the very opening lines of the Bible as we read that God swept over the face of the waters. And then ironically, it's also found in the very end of the Bible in Revelation 2, as we hear, let anyone who is thirsty come. So this picture of water in its many different forms and its life-giving potential is written throughout the whole of the Bible. It made me wonder, let's do a bit of a community test. What stories do you know from the Bible that involve water? Just shout them out to me if you have any idea. Wedding at Cana. Jesus, the woman at the well. I heard the flood as well, Noah and the flood. Naomi, did you say? Naaman, yep. Moses striking the rock, yep. Jesus being baptized. The Red Sea. Jonah. Yep, that one too. The point being that it doesn't take long once you start reading the Bible to hit water in some story, form or another. So it really is quite important. And water, to start with, really links with creation. In Genesis 1, Genesis 1 speaks of God creating out of the chaotic waters to bring humanity into a new world. We go on to Genesis 3, and this speaks of God's purpose of creation. But then once humanity disrupts this purpose, the pattern then becomes about rescue, a passing through the waters to a new creation. And then Genesis 6-8 speaks of Noah and the flood and being saved through the water to a new creation. So there's this idea of creation and new creation constantly being connected to water throughout the Bible. I think we wouldn't have much of an argument to say that water is pretty essential for life. And Frederick Buechner, reflecting on the significance of water, says this: "For 9 months we breathe it in. The sight of water in oceans, rivers and lakes is soothing to the spirit as almost nothing else. To swim in it is to become as weightless and as untrammeled as in dreams. The wake of a ship, the falling of a waterfall and the tumbling of a brook can hold us spellbound for hours. And in times of drought, we feel as parched in our being as the lawn that crackles beneath our feet. If air is our element, surely only water is our heart's delight." And just speaks to there's something just intrinsically peaceful and really calming about water. And so it's no surprise, as was mentioned there, that water plays a significant part right from the beginning of our life. That we spend 9 months in our mother's womb in amniotic fluid, in our amniotic sac there, and it's no surprise that that's our beginning place. It made me remember when I gave birth to our first boy, Zach. He may or may not be here, just to kind of, really, it's always awkward when you have adult sons, right, in those kind of spaces. He's right there. But I remember clearly the moment in the birthing suite when we were just about to push, and I watched the obstetrician put gumboots on. And in this moment, I had quite an out-of-body experience as I thought to myself, what is he putting gumboots on for? And then proceed sometime later, and I went, that is what he put gumboots on for. And I realised, smart man. As then I realised the mess that needs to be cleaned up. And so, water is very much a part of birth. It's very much a part of the beginning of life. And then likewise, Jesus talks about being born again, that there's something about our new creation, the new spirit that comes in us that requires us to be born again. And then let me take you to the beginning of Jesus' ministry, where he's baptised by John the Baptist. In Matthew 3, verse 13 to 17, let's read this. It's on the screen there, and I've highlighted, if you can see it. There's so many links here to creation and new creation. Then Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptised by him. And when Jesus had been baptised, just as he came up from the water, suddenly the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." And there's all these links, these throwbacks to both creation and new creation that are linking baptisms to beginning. And for those of us that have been baptised, often it's our baptism that is this moment of beginning again. I didn't grow up in the church, and so that turning point for choosing to believe Jesus and choosing to be baptised really felt like quite a line in the sand of saying, actually, this is something I really believe in that's personal to me. I don't know what it's like to grow up in a Christian home But part of me wonders whether it's actually harder in some ways because it's just so immersed in your experience that you don't quite know the before and the after. But I was very clear. I knew what life was like on my own, and I knew when I met Jesus, and I knew what a difference he made. And it's funny how for years I had some young adult friends who would say like, oh, you just never backslide, you never seem to struggle to walk away from God. And I'm like, why would I? I know what that's like. I've been there. I don't want to go back there. And it was, I think, it's quite interesting that turning point, that beginning that it can be. And I want to make a point too. It's no mistake that in this account of Jesus' baptism, God's acceptance of him and his pleasure and delight in his son at that moment precedes all the doing that we've come to know Jesus for. And I don't think that should ever get lost on us when we read the baptism story. That God is so well pleased with Jesus before he's done anything. It's just a sense of value and worth that we also get to know the feeling of. That there's a moment then of baptism where there's so much ahead of us that we might yet not know about. And yet God's delight and pleasure in us is full and complete in that moment. We should never skip over that. And if you just need to stop there and meditate on that, then I would suggest you do so. N.T. Wright says that baptism reflects a turning from one way of living and relating to God and neighbour. It's a turning towards the way of God with all your heart and allowing God to do a new thing in you. And there's a story in Acts 8 where one of the disciples, Philip, he gets sent to this place and he comes, there's a eunuch travelling in a royal chariot. And he encounters this Ethiopian eunuch reading Isaiah and needing somebody to explain it to him. And then the eunuch, upon hearing the good news, once Philip comes inside the chariot and explains Isaiah and explains, what it could mean, he says, "Look, here is water. What is to prevent me from being baptized?" He commanded the chariot to stop, and both of them, Philip and the eunuch, went down into the water, and Philip baptized him. So for some people, and especially in the book of Acts as you read, there's this sense of like believing and being baptized, very little gap in between. It's this sense of like, I believe, I want to be, this is the beginning, I want that to be connected. And not many of us may be familiar. We don't talk about eunuchs in our time. It's not the kind of thing that's really familiar in our context. But let me read to you what one biblical dictionary has to say about eunuchs, because I think it's really quite fascinating. Now, typically a eunuch is a castrated official in the royal courts. So that means they've been mutilated, their genitals have been removed. And despite the high political standing enjoyed by some eunuchs, their peculiar impairment usually rendered them among the most scorned and stigmatised members of society. And in a patriarchal culture where honour was tied to male domination, the seemingly effeminate, impotent eunuch was viewed with shame and as a threatening social deviant. In ancient Jewish worlds, the eunuch's alien status was compounded by his lack of wholeness and inability to perpetuate the covenant line through circumcision and procreation. Biblical law excluded men with damaged genitals from the covenant community. And I would add, and yet here we have Philip, an accepted disciple of Christ, openly baptizing this eunuch who is arguably from a sexual minority in his day and openly excluded from community. And we also have the Apostle Luke telling this story of mercy and inclusion to be remembered through the generations as a picture of faithful belief and obedience in the name of Jesus. That just really warms my heart. And I say all of that to say that baptism as a beginning appears to be expansive, life-giving, inclusive, and it opens us up to the fullness of God's mercy and love. And let's look at baptism then as belonging, as I believe that story is the perfect segue for. There's a definite pattern in the Bible of baptism relating to God providing salvation, providing rescue for his people through the waters, a way back to make peace with our Creator. Noah was saved through the chaotic flood waters. Moses was rescued as a baby through the waters. And then he led God's people through the waters to deliver them from slavery and oppression. Joshua then leads God's people through the Jordan into the promised land. Over and over, we have a picture of the waters of death making way for a new life in God, a new community in God. N.T. Wright says, when people get baptised in the early church, they are coming through death and out the other side into being kingdom people. Baptism identifies us with Christ. It identifies us with his death and his resurrection. And it identifies us with one another. It's something we have in common. Our old self or way of being is crucified with Christ through the waters and risen with Christ into new life in him as we come up out of the waters. And that was very much my experience of my own baptism when I was 15. You know, the kind of the space of acceptance and care and nurture that I found within the church walls was truly a sense of belonging that I hadn't experienced before then. And so for me, that baptism really was this space of saying, you know what, this is who I am. You know, and I invited lots of friends and family and, and they weren't necessarily supportive of my choice and they didn't really understand, and some were quite judgmental, actually. But I just also wanted to invite them and include them in because I felt like it was a way of me identifying and showing something of who I wanted to be. Eric Peterson, in his book that I mentioned earlier, says this: the watery passage of baptism provides a compelling metaphor for the way a person takes that first, fateful step in crossing the threshold from earth to heaven, from sin to salvation, from death to life, from slavery to freedom. It is a sacred, saving crossing. The water of salvation is both tomb and womb. It could be said then that baptism signals a particular moment in a person's life when a believer crosses that threshold from death to life, from mortality to immortality, initiating them as citizens of the kingdom of heaven. That it is conceived of in a covenantal language adds only holy gravitas to its dramatic, life-altering implications. And it's in that kind of way of thinking that baptism, much like, as we come to the table, there's nothing necessarily special in the water or in the act itself, but yet there somehow is. Just like in communion, we're taking bread, we're taking wine. There's nothing special in the Coles bread and the Aldi wine or whatever it might be. That is not the point. But yet somehow, as we bring ourselves to that and we connect with God through this symbolic act, something happens in the spiritual realm that is sometimes feels quite mysterious and isn't something we can always explain away, but something that we want to lean into. So baptism as beginnings, baptisms as belonging, and then I'd love to look at baptism as a way of becoming. Water throughout the Old Testament was also linked with ritual cleansing and purification. And there's no doubt that while baptism occurs in a moment, it's a one-off act that we are a part of, the best kind of baptism occurs when we continue living wet, which is a phrase coined by Peterson in this book. It's this idea that as we live out our new kingdom reality each and every day, that we would be living wet from the consequence of our baptism, that it's not this event that we've done once and we leave as a date in the calendar, but actually that we stay wet. I love that imagery of just going through life dripping with, kind of the impact of what it means to live as a kingdom bearer. Just as a wedding marks the beginning of a marriage, and yet no one expects a bride and groom to fully understand the full extent or the full demands that may be required of them, so too in a baptism, with very similar covenantal language, we can't be expecting those in that moment to really understand the fullness of what life is going to entail for them as they follow Jesus. But yet there's a commitment shown to actually be willing to explore and look about what that might mean, how to live that point forward. And really, baptism lived out every day speaks to a turning point and then a returning to Jesus over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Turning and then returning to him. And really, it's how we live out our faith from that point forward that defines the importance and meaning of our baptism. The moment itself, in some way, is like a gateway or a portal to what could be, but whether it truly lives up to its meaning and its importance actually gets, I think, seen as we live out each day from that point. Going back to Peterson in Wade in the Water, he says, baptism is a propellant that thrusts us meaningfully into the world. Just as the Spirit drove Jesus into the wilderness immediately following his baptism, we are sent into the world. Just as Jesus faced a series of temptations from the devil, we confront the evils of our environment. And just as Jesus was forced to renounce Satan in order to accomplish the will of the Father, so we too practice behaviours of turning from our sin, he calls that our no, and turning to God, our yes. Baptism drives and decides. The continual movements of the baptized to repent of their sin and return to Christ is a lifelong liturgy for believers. Loving God, loving others, begins the pathway that leads to life, and each day following our baptism, we choose that path. You know, the path of spiritual formation is a life committed to becoming more like Jesus. You know, and that's done for the glory of God and it's done for the sake of others. Rather than being a straight line of achievement or a transactional progression of sorts, I think it's a little bit more of a meandering wandering, discovering what it means to actually walk out your faith, what it means to live wet, to live in the echo of your baptism year after year. It's a long obedience in the same direction, it has been coined as well. And you know, coming up we have our church camp, as has been mentioned. You know, we have the opportunity there on that Sunday in the ocean there to be able to baptise anyone that may wish to be baptised. As I say, we don't have a set service that we put aside for it per se, but I think that's also a lovely kind of mark to work towards. If you're sitting here and you haven't been baptised and that's something that you feel God is kind of, quickening your heart about and you'd love to explore further, we'd love to think about what might it look like to mark that day, and who knows, maybe that could become a bit of an annual thing for us where on that Sunday we are able to baptise whoever might want to be baptised. And I've come across a course from Renovare called From the Inside Out, and I would love to sit with anyone who's wanting to be baptised any time in the near future, or perhaps who has been baptised or wants a bit of a refresher. I'm thinking of putting 3 Saturdays aside, the end of August, early September, to go through this course. There's 6 sessions, which they are: what is spiritual formation? What is my picture of God? What is my picture of myself? What is my picture of the gospel? How do people change? And how do I follow Jesus? And I'd love to just go through that with anyone who might be willing to do so. I haven't done the full course, so at some level it's a little bit of a pilot, it's a little bit of a test. So if you don't mind that kind of territory, then you're more than welcome to join. And we'll send out an email this week from church as we do, and I'll include in there a link for those that might be interested in exploring more of what does it mean to live out the reality of this baptism I've been a part of. You know, as I said, baptism is a moment in time, but I love the thought of being a community that continually lives out of that space, that is known for living a life that makes our baptisms actually look good. And that doesn't mean that we always get it right and that we're on this trajectory where things just go great, but it's this commitment to once again return to that point. As Jaxon alluded to, in that sense of remembering, that we remember what the commitment was in our heart that we made at that time. That we remember the desire to actually want to live out a life that made a difference, that honoured God, that allowed those around me to live freer and to find God's love for themselves. So I hope that's been helpful for you, looking at baptism through the lens of beginnings, through the lens of belonging, and through the lens of becoming. And as I wrap that up, we get to then come to the table at this time. So Jaxon, if you want to grab your helpers to come and set up, that would be great.
Thank you so much for joining us. Each week at Westcity, we say a benediction together. We do this because we believe that the purpose of the church is to be a caring community for the world, and that as we go and serve others, we enter into Christ's work of welcome, restoration and healing, both for us and others. We believe that in doing so, we get to see and encounter Christ. So let's say the benediction together. We come together as the church to be reminded of the go of Christ. So we will go out and feed the hungry, Go out and clothe the naked. Go out and fight for justice. Go out and end oppression. Go out and proclaim anew the old story. Go out and associate with those who don't look like us, think like us, act like us, and don't even like us. And we'll do it all in the name of the one who sent us. His name is Jesus.